Imagine a kingdom so rich that its palaces glittered with marble, its libraries held more books than the rest of Europe combined, and its poets wrote verses that still echo today. This was Al-Andalus, the jewel of medieval Spain. But when that mighty empire collapsed, it didn't vanish quietly. Instead, it shattered into dozens of small kingdoms, each one brilliant, each one fragile, and all of them doomed. These were the Taifa Kingdoms, cities of poetry, power, and betrayal, whose rise and fall would change the fate of Spain forever. In the early 11th century, the mighty empire of Al-Andalus, the Muslim-ruled Iberian kingdom, began to crumble. For nearly 300 years, the Umayyad caliphs of Córdoba had built one of the most advanced societies in Europe. Their palaces gleamed with marble and fountains. Their libraries held hundreds of thousands of books, and their scholars translated Greek philosophy and Arabic science into Latin. To outsiders, Córdoba was the shining jewel of Europe. But beneath the surface, tensions brewed. Rival factions, tribal divisions, and ambitious warlords slowly chipped away at the caliphate's unity. By 1031, the caliphate collapsed, leaving behind a shattered mosaic of smaller, independent Muslim states known as the Taifas. Each Taifa was ruled by a local king, often a warlord or noble who seized power in his own city. The once united empire was now fragmented into dozens of competing realms: Seville, Granada, Zaragoza, Toledo, Valencia, and many more. While they inherited the grandeur of Córdoba, they also inherited its weaknesses, the Christian kingdoms. In the north, Castile, Leon, Navarre, and Aragon saw their chance. For centuries, they had been slowly pushing south in what became known as the Reconquista. Now, with the Muslims divided, the Christians found their enemy weaker than ever. Yet the Taifas were not entirely powerless. Many became centers of dazzling culture and art, carrying forward the legacy of Al-Andalus. Poets thrived, musicians filled the courts with melody, and architects designed mosques and palaces that still inspire wonder today. But this brilliance came with a fatal flaw. The Taifas were constantly at war with one another. Instead of uniting against the Christian kingdoms, they hired Christian knights as mercenaries to fight their Muslim rivals. Gold flowed out of the Taifas to fund these battles, and soon the Christian rulers demanded heavy tribute, known as pariahs, in exchange for peace. What had once been a land of wealth and pride became a patchwork of fragile states, caught between survival and humiliation. The fall of the caliphate did not just mark the end of unity. It marked the beginning of a turbulent new chapter in Spain's history. The Taifa kingdoms would shine brightly, but only for a short time, before the storm of conquest closed in on them. Their story is one of brilliance and betrayal, of cultural splendor and political weakness, a story that shaped the destiny of Spain itself. The Taifas, despite their vulnerability, dazzled the medieval world with their cultural brilliance. Cities like Seville, Granada, and Zaragoza became thriving centers of art, poetry, and science. Their rulers competed not only in war, but also in beauty and intellect. Each wanted their city to outshine the others, and so they poured wealth into magnificent palaces, gardens, and mosques. In Seville, the Abbasid dynasty transformed the city into one of the richest and most powerful Taifas. Its markets bustled, with silk, spices, and precious metals. Poets such as Al-Mutamid, the king himself, filled the court with verses of love, sorrow, and longing. Seville was both a kingdom and a stage, where rulers displayed not only their power, but also their sophistication. Granada, under the Zirids, built palaces on the slopes of the Sierra Nevada and welcomed scholars from across the Islamic world. Zaragoza flourished as well, producing works of philosophy, astronomy, and medicine that would later filter into Europe. But this cultural competition was double-edged. While the Taifas cultivated refinement, they neglected unity. Their rivalries grew fierce, and their alliances shifted constantly. One day, Seville might ally with Granada. The next, they would betray each other for land or tribute. This instability left them vulnerable to the growing power of Christian Spain. The Christian kingdoms, especially Castile and Leon, saw the wealth of the Taifas and demanded tribute in exchange for peace. The Taifa rulers, instead of resisting, often paid enormous sums of gold to their enemies, believing that buying peace was cheaper than fighting wars. This strategy worked for a time, but it bled the Taifas dry and made them dependent on their northern rivals. Yet for ordinary people, life in the Taifas was often vibrant and full of opportunity. Markets were lively, gardens blossomed, and the arts thrived in a way unmatched in much of Europe. Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin scholars exchanged ideas freely. This mixture of cultures created an environment where learning and creativity thrived, leaving behind a lasting legacy that influenced Europe for centuries. The Taifas may have been politically fragile, but culturally they shone like stars in the night sky. Their brilliance, however, only made their eventual downfall more tragic. As the Taifas quarreled among themselves, the Christian kingdoms of the north grew stronger and bolder. Castile, Leon, Aragon, and Navarre had spent centuries fighting for survival against the Muslim south, but now the tables were turning. With the caliphate gone and the Taifas divided, the Christians saw their chance to strike. King Ferdinand I of Leon was one of the first to take advantage. Instead of wasting his armies in endless war, he demanded gold from the Taifas in return for peace. These tributes, called parias, poured into Christian treasuries and funded castles, armies, and churches. Toledo, Zaragoza, and Seville all paid these heavy sums. The Christians grew rich, while the Taifas grew weaker. But tribute was never enough to stop ambition. By the late 11th century, Christian kings began pushing deeper into Muslim lands. In 1085, the most shocking event yet shook Al-Andalus. The Christian king Alfonso VI of Castile marched into Toledo, once the proud capital of Visigothic Spain, and now a major Muslim city. The fall of Toledo sent shockwaves through the entire peninsula. Muslims feared that all of Al-Andalus might soon collapse. In desperation, the Taifa rulers looked for help, but instead of uniting among themselves, they turned to outsiders. They invited the Almoravids, a powerful Muslim dynasty from North Africa, to cross the sea and defend them. It was a fateful choice. For the Christians, the Reconquista was no longer just about survival. It became a holy mission, blessed by the Church and fueled by promises of land and glory. Knights from across Europe began arriving in Spain, eager to fight what they saw as a sacred war. The Taifas, with their poetry and palaces, suddenly found themselves trapped between two great forces: Christian expansion from the north and strict North African warriors from the south. The fall of Toledo marked the turning point. The Taifas' golden age of cultural brilliance was beginning to darken under the shadow of conquest. Their reliance on tribute and mercenaries had bought them time, but now time was running out. The Christian kingdoms had tasted victory, and they would not stop until the crescent of Al-Andalus was replaced by the cross. When King Alfonso VI captured Toledo, the Taifas panicked. They knew their armies could not match the Christians in open battle. Their wealth and poetry meant little against steel and fire. So the rulers of Seville and other Taifas sent messengers across the sea to Morocco, begging the Almoravids for aid. The Almoravids were a Berber dynasty from the deserts of North Africa, hardened by years of war and faith. They followed a strict interpretation of Islam, far more austere than the luxurious courts of the Taifas. When their leader Yusuf ibn Tashfin crossed into Spain in 1086, everything changed. At the Battle of Sagrajas, the Almoravids and the Taifas joined forces against Alfonso VI. The Christian army was crushed, and the victory revived Muslim hopes. But the Almoravids quickly realized that the Taifas were weak and decadent. Their rulers lived in luxury, writing poetry while enemies advanced on their lands. Yusuf ibn Tashfin decided that if Al-Andalus was to survive, it could not be left in the hands of these kings. One by one, the Almoravids took control of the Taifa Kingdoms. Seville, Granada, Zaragoza, all were absorbed into their growing empire. The local kings were stripped of power, and the Almoravids imposed their strict religious rule. Music and poetry were silenced, replaced by discipline and prayer. For many, it felt as though the brilliance of the Taifas had been extinguished. Yet the Almoravids did bring stability. Their armies held back the Christian advance for several decades, preserving Muslim rule in Spain. They built fortresses, strengthened cities, and restored unity, something the Taifas had failed to achieve. But their harsh rule also bred resentment. The people of Al-Andalus had grown used to a more open and cultured life, and the Almoravids' rigidity left many longing for the lost days of the Taifa courts. The Almoravid era was a pause, a breathing space, but not a solution. In time, even they would weaken, and a new wave of warriors from North Africa, the Almohads, would rise to take their place. The cycle of brilliance, division, conquest, and outside intervention would continue, shaping the fate of Spain for centuries. By the mid-12th century, the Almoravids had begun to lose control. Their strict rule, once a source of strength, now seemed oppressive. Rebellions broke out across Al-Andalus, and Christian kingdoms pressed their advantage. Into this chaos came another North African movement, fiercer and more zealous than the Almoravids, the Almohads. The Almohads claimed to restore pure faith and discipline. Crossing into Spain around 1147, they quickly defeated the fading Almoravids and established themselves as the new masters of Al-Andalus. For a brief time, they brought both power and brilliance. Under Almohad rule, cities like Seville flourished again. The great Giralda Tower of Seville, which still stands today, was built as a mosque's minaret during this era. Philosophy, science, and architecture reached new heights, even as the Almohads demanded stricter religious conformity. But the Christian kingdoms were no longer the small northern states of centuries past. They had grown stronger, united by a common mission, and supported by knights from across Europe. In 1212, at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, the combined forces of Castile, Aragon, and Navarre delivered a crushing defeat to the Almohads. It was one of the most decisive battles of the Reconquista. After this defeat, Muslim power in Spain began to collapse rapidly. One by one, cities fell to the Christians. Córdoba was taken in 1236, Valencia in 1238, and Seville in 1248. The once mighty Al-Andalus was reduced to a shadow of its former self. Only one Muslim kingdom remained, the Nasrid dynasty of Granada. The Almohads, like the Almoravids before them, had come as saviors but left as failures. Their strictness could not hold back the tide of Christian conquest. The fate of Al-Andalus now rested in a single fragile flower that clung to life in the south, Granada. For over 2 centuries after the fall of Seville, the Nasrid kingdom of Granada stood as the last refuge of Muslim Spain. Protected by the mountains of Andalusia and supported by clever diplomacy, Granada managed to survive while the rest of Al-Andalus vanished. The kings of Granada paid tribute to Castile when necessary, played Christian rivals against each other, and built alliances that bought them time. Within their walls, life flourished. The jewel of Granada, the Alhambra Palace, rose during this period. With its delicate arches, flowing fountains, and gardens of paradise, it remains one of the greatest architectural wonders of the medieval world. Poetry, music, and learning found a final home here, echoing the lost brilliance of the Taifas centuries earlier. But Granada's survival came at a cost. It was a vassal state, always at the mercy of its Christian neighbors. By the late 15th century, the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile united Spain's two most powerful Christian kingdoms. Together, they launched the final campaign to end Muslim rule. After years of siege, Granada surrendered in 1492, bringing nearly 8 centuries of Islamic presence in Spain to an end. The fall of Granada marked both an ending and a beginning. For the Christians, it was the triumph of the Reconquista. For the Muslims and Jews of Spain, it was exile, conversion, or persecution. And for the world, 1492 would be remembered not only as the year Granada fell, but also as the year Columbus set sail across the Atlantic. The Taifa Kingdoms had long vanished by then, but their legacy endured. In their poetry, their architecture, and their scholarship, the Taifas had left a mark that outlived their fragile states. Their story is one of brilliance amid weakness, of beauty amid conflict. A reminder that even in times of division, culture can shine so brightly that its light lasts for centuries. The story of the Taifa Kingdoms is more than just a tale of kings and battles. It's the story of how brilliance can shine even in times of weakness, and how beauty can live alongside betrayal. These small kingdoms gave the world poetry, science, and architecture that still inspire us today, but their divisions made them fragile, and their enemies never forgot it. By the time Granada fell in 1492, the dream of Al-Andalus had ended. Yet the memory of its gardens, its libraries, and its palaces still lives on, whispering of a lost world where culture burned brighter than conquest. The rise and fall of the Taifas is a reminder. Greatness is not only measured by the strength of armies, but by the legacy a people leave behind.